You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and let's get you an update to the eye drop murderer, Jessie Krzyzewski. She was sentenced this week for murdering the elderly woman she cared for back in 2018, and she murdered her with eye drops. So here's how the mind manipulation and eventual murder played out. 62-year-old Lynn Hernan, she lived alone and she had very unique passions. She had worked as a hairstylist and a salon owner, and she loved to entertain and cook. As her health began to deteriorate, she employed, and I use that word loosely, she employed Jessie Krzyzewski as a caretaker. Now, there was no formal agreement, but it's reported that Lynn was generous and she would open her home to Jessie. Jessie would come to Lynn's home and help with house cleaning and other chores like errand running and numerous doctor's appointments and retrieving of prescriptions from the pharmacy. Well, the now 2-year-long arrangement of helping Lynn was working out pretty good for Jessie. She had been named in Lynn's will after some time, and she also had access to Lynn's finances and her safety deposit box. See, Lynn was truly alone. She had no family. So the two women she relied on the most were friends from cosmetology school decades earlier. And one of those friends was Jessie's mother. And that is how Jessie became a quasi-employee of Lynn, and also how she eventually had nearly all control over Lynn's finances. Well, in the fall of 2018, Lynn was back at the hospital. According to Jessie, she spent 2 weeks there without much of a diagnosis or resolution. Upon her release, Jessie said her health was not better. She had taken several falls, and the mysterious stomach episodes had caused Lynn to gain quite a bit of weight. Home health was supposed to begin care for Lynn, at least according to Jessie, but until home health was set up, it fell on Jessie and a young man named Anthony to help with Lynn's needs. Well, on October 3rd of 2018, Jessie called 911. She told dispatchers she had found Lynn unresponsive and not breathing in her recliner. When EMS arrived, they pronounced Lynn dead on the scene. And then when investigators arrived, they found what they initially thought was a drug overdose. Lynn had crushed up medication on her chest, and on a plate that was on a table directly next to her recliner, there was more crushed up medication. And that table, well, it also had a large number of prescription medication bottles. Jessie was willing to help the investigators during those first few hours of Lynn's death, and she said she felt Lynn had been acting strangely since returning from the hospital. She even went as far as to speculate that Lynn could have been suicidal. An autopsy was performed, and while investigators waited for the toxicology reports, they began asking questions of anyone else who could have known Lynn. But it was limited. Lynn did have a longtime male friend, and he told investigators that he was certain Lynn would not have tried to complete suicide. He also raised concerns about Jessie, saying she was driving Lynn's Jeep now that Lynn had died, and this friend felt that was just bad taste. And while still waiting for toxicology, a distant cousin of Lynn's contacted police and said he had been doing some research, and what he had found had him concerned. He knew that Jessie had been the beneficiary of Lynn's estate, and he wanted to know who this Jessie girl was. And as he dug into her, he discovered she had a criminal history with several convictions for forgery and fraud. The cousin was asking investigators to check all of the probate filings just to make sure there was nothing suspicious on the financial end of Lynn's death. And then days after that report, the long-awaited toxicology came back, and Waukesha County Medical Examiner Linda Bedrisky had found that Lynn had a fatal dose of tetrahydrozoline in her system. And you can find tetrahydrozoline in eye drops. Now, the cause of death was classified as homicide. At this point, investigators really began to dig into Jessie's life. They started with Jessie's boyfriend. He told investigators how sick Lynn had been and that Jessie had spent months at the hospital with Lynn while she was in a coma. Well, the investigators broke the news to the boyfriend, telling him there was no coma and that Jessie had embellished Lynn's hospital visits. So In turn, the boyfriend spilled some information. He said Jesse's day job paid her $20 an hour working at a dental office, but he could never understand how she could visit the casino regularly and drop $500 a night gambling when her income was so limited. He said Jesse was also known to shower gifts on people, and these were expensive gifts, Game Boys and laptop computers. Well, armed with all of that information, in July of 2019, 9 months after Lynns' death, cops executed a search warrant at Jesse's home. She was immediately taken to jail on a probation violation, which meant that the detectives had pretty easy access to her. And Jesse granted that access. She voluntarily interviewed with police 6 times over the next 10-day period. And this is when Jesse's story starts taking left turns, then right turns. She started spinning a tale of drug usage in Lynns' life, and that she probably was using too many prescription drugs, and that was why she was sick. Well, investigators finally tell her about the discovery of the fatal dose of eye drops in Lynns' system. And Jesse's story changes again. She now tells investigators that Lynn was obsessive about her eye drops. She would buy hundreds and hundreds of bottles. During one of the interviews, Jessie said she thought the medical examiner was actually wrong, and that there was no way that Lynn could have died from eye drop poisoning. But then, just minutes later, she changed her theory and told detectives that she had seen Lynn drink vodka mixed with Visine eye drops on the day before she died. And then in another left turn, Jessie told investigators it wasn't just the day before when she saw Lynn with eye drop laced vodka. It had been happening for days, and that the vodka and eye drops were causing her to lose control of her bowels. Then Jessie switched back to the suicide theory and told detectives that Lynn had been looking up ways to complete suicide, and that she had also purchased a gun that she intended to use to kill herself. Now, the last twist in Jessie's story was that she admitted to helping Lynn prepare a bottle of water with 6 bottles of Visine added to the water. Jessie then said, "I'm probably going to prison for the rest of my life for helping Lynn do what she wanted to do." Well, investigators began digging through the financials, and they discovered that Jessie had spent more than $50,000 at 2 Wisconsin casinos in less than a year. They discovered she had opened a JCPenney credit card in Lynn's name on the morning that Lynn was murdered. And all in all, they believe she had stolen over $290,000 from Lynn before killing her. Well, in November of last year, Jessie went to trial for the murder of Lynn. During the trial, Jessie's former boyfriend testified about the lies that Jessie would tell him, including the embellishment about Lynn's failing health. And her former boyfriend's cousin, who actually lived with the two for a while, well, he testified that Jessie would spend outrageous amounts of money at the casino, but then she would also be laid off from work at the same time with no steady income. And remember Anthony? So he's the other caregiver of Lynn? Well, he testified that Lynn had never mentioned suicide to him, and that he had seen credit card statements come to Lynn's house with very high balances, and that he called those red flags because Lynn rarely even went out of the house to go shopping. He also said she was generous, but it wasn't with lavish gifts. So if she was purchasing items with these credit cards, how was he not seeing the items? And then a jewelry store owner testified that Jessie had sold him jewelry that he believed belonged to Lynn. And a cellmate of Jessie's, while she was incarcerated, testified that Jessie admitted to stealing Lynn's money. That cellmate said Jessie confessed to writing checks to herself from Lynn's bank accounts, and that she would buy furniture and items for kids, and also she would spend at the casinos. Well, evidence was presented that Lynn had received an inheritance from her mother of $250,000. That money had been placed in a money market account. Since her mother's death in 2014, 22 checks had been written from that account. 20 of those checks were written to Jessie. When Lynn died, the balance in that money market account was $88. Now, there's much, much more about her financial misdeeds and the misuse of Lynn's money, but I think you kind of get the idea. Well, the jury deliberated for almost 11 hours, and they found Jesse guilty of murder in the first degree. She was also found guilty of 2 counts of property theft. And last week, Jesse was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years of incarceration. Judge Jennifer Duro told Jesse at the sentencing that she wanted her time served to be long enough that Jesse would be much older when she was released than Lynn was when she was murdered. Jesse will be 80 when she becomes eligible for parole. Now, Jesse didn't go down without a fight. She spoke for 2 hours on the day of the sentencing, maintaining her innocence. She insisted that Lynn died from suicide. And you guys, I wish I could tell you more about Lynn. Her obituary was so brief, and she doesn't really have anyone speaking out for her, except for that distant cousin who alerted the police to the financial questions. We can only hope that she did not suffer much pain at the hands of Jesse. But I do want to tell you, though, that Jesse, she's not the only eye drop murderer. It's happened before. In January of 2020, Lana Sue Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter when she was accused of poisoning her husband's drink. She laced that drink with eye drops. Now she's serving 25 years in prison for that conviction. And Joshua Lee Hunsucker has been accused of killing his wife Stacy with a fatal dose of tetrahydrozoline. Joshua's case has similarities to Jesse's case. He has not only been accused of murder, but he has also been accused of insurance fraud and obtaining property under false pretenses due to Stacy's murder. And on a completely separate case, Joshua has been accused of setting fire to a medical helicopter during flight in November of 2019. Now, a trial date is still not set for Joshua, but he is on my radar, and I'll mention this case to Peyton and see if she will cover it on Into the Dark or Murder with My Husband. Okay, this next true crime incident that I'm bringing you, it's a little different than what I usually do for you listeners. I was DM'd about this story, and when I started looking into it, I was left with more questions than answers. I try to bring you stories with a beginning and an end, or at least a direction, like we're going to trial or we're waiting for evidence. But this one is strange, so I'm going to tell you what I know, and I'll just be watching it because I'm really confused about the police investigation in Henry County, Alabama. All right, 44-year-old Michael Hallstead and his wife, 43-year-old Karen Hallstead, well, they're parents to 19-year-old Logan Hallstead. And Logan's had a difficult life. He was afflicted with spina bifida, and that led to many other health issues for the young man. Logan was supposedly still living with his parents when his father, Michael, called police in October of last year to say he had experienced a manic episode, and he thought his son's dead body was in a freezer in the back portion of the property of the house that they had previously rented, but was now vacant. Okay, did you follow that? He calls the police in October and says, hey, I don't live there anymore, but I think my son's body is in a freezer on that property, and I think I had a manic episode and I don't know what happened. Okay, so the police, well, they go check it out. They look around, they look in the freezer, and then they say, we don't see anything, and they leave. Then new renters take over the home and property. And just days after the police visit, those new renters begin cleaning up the back portion of the property. They realize the non-working freezer is too heavy to move and dispose of in a landfill, so they take on the task of emptying it, and then they're going to throw it away. Well, when they open the freezer, they encounter a foul odor, and after moving a tarp, they can see the hand of a dead body. And that's how they discover the remains of Logan Hallstead inside a cardboard box covered in blankets. Now, authorities believe he had been in that freezer since July or August, so roughly 3 to 4 months. Now, there's more you need to know here. On the day that Michael called officers and told them that he believed his son's remains were in that freezer, he was then arrested and jailed for a separate incident. He had been charged with domestic violence previously, and he hadn't shown up for his court date. So they jailed him for 10 days as punishment for not being where he was supposed to be. And what this means is they already had the guy that they wanted to question in jail. And they failed to find the remains of Logan just days before others could smell and easily find the remains of Logan. Well, since the new renters found what police couldn't, Michael and Karen have been arrested and charged with reckless death and abuse of a corpse. At the bond hearing, Michael told the judge that his wife had nothing to do with the disposing of Logan's body. The judge has held both Michael and Karen with Michael's bond set at $275,000 and Karen's bond set at $90,000. And the Alabama Department of Human Resources has taken custody of the other two children, who are twins, that were still living with Michael and Karen. Like I said, not the typical story that I bring you here, but I'll be watching to see if anything more develops. And I regret to tell you, there's not a comprehensive obituary for Logan. It's basically just a death notice. I feel like Logan didn't get a voice in this world, and that's tragic. And an update to a case that true crime followers probably know a thing or two about. Back in Petaluma, California in 1993, Richard Allan Davis snuck into Polly Klaas's home. She was sleeping with two other friends at her mother's home. They were having a slumber party. At around 10:30 that October night, Davis entered Polly's bedroom and told all three girls he was not going to harm them and that he just wanted money. Davis then tied up Polly's two friends and pulled pillowcases over their heads. He directed them to count to 1,000. He then kidnapped Polly at knife point. Later that night, he strangled her and dumped her body 50 miles away from her home. Now, Davis was sentenced to death for Polly's murder, in part for taunting the family by flipping them off during the trial and also by claiming that Polly was sexually abused by her father, and then also in part for his past criminal history. Okay, see, it wasn't the first kidnapping Davis had completed. Just months prior to kidnapping and murdering Polly, Davis had been released from prison after serving his sentence for a conviction of kidnapping another woman. And that's where the update comes into play. In 2022, a new law came into effect in California where judges can no longer use prior convictions to enhance the sentencing of a criminal who has been found guilty of his or her new charges. So, Davis's lawyers are requesting a new sentencing portion of his trial since the new law has been enacted. Sonoma County District Attorney Sarah Brooks says Davis's request does not fall in the scope of the new law, that his death penalty is too extreme for the new law's expectation of lighter sentence reform. Polly's father, Mark, who has become an outspoken advocate for children, said in a statement the following: "If my family can be subjected to the possible recall of the capital sentence of a condemned murderer who, prior to murdering Polly, had multiple convictions for violence towards women and was diagnosed as a sexually sadistic psychopath, then any victim's family who thought that justice was served in the courtroom is in for a shocking new reality." Now, Mark's statement is why I bring you this update. As criminal justice reform laws begin to be more prevalent, positive and negative things will come about. One positive thing, it will be the softening of sentences for women who aid their significant other in drug deals. We have women serving large prison sentences for just being present during violent drug crimes when they really did nothing in the actual committing of the crime. But a negative, well, violent criminals will find loopholes to be freed from prison early. And with this new law in California, a violent criminal might receive a significantly lighter sentence because the judge can't take into account that the criminal has committed similar crimes and served time before and wasn't reformed during that prison time. That criminal can just keep reoffending or has the potential to keep reoffending. Okay, it's doubtful this appeal will help free Davis, but I will watch as the process rolls forward. And an update to another story that a Rise in Crime listener asked me to follow. And it's not the positive outcome that many had wished for. It had been reported that 27-year-old Cole Brings Plenty, he's an actor who plays a reoccurring role on the Yellowstone spinoff 1923. Well, Cole had been reported missing in Kansas. His uncle Mo Brings Plenty, who stars in Yellowstone, had shared the missing poster on his Instagram saying Cole had last been seen on Sunday evening, so Easter Sunday evening, about a week ago. And when he was seen, he was in his white Ford Explorer at the time. Well, family had realized he was missing when he didn't show up for a scheduled appointment with his agent. Mo said this was uncharacteristic for Cole and that it raised alarm bells for his family. Well, Cole has been found dead in Johnson County, Kansas. Deputies had been called to a wooded area where Cole's car was found. Then, Cole was discovered a ways from his car. His manner of death has not been released, and further complicating the death is that Cole was under investigation at the time for a domestic violence accusation. According to the Lawrence, Kansas Police Department, Cole had a probable cause for arrest in the domestic violence issue. The LKPD said they responded to reports of a female screaming for help, but when they arrived, the suspect, who was identified as Cole, had fled the area. Well, Mo, his uncle, addressed the domestic violence accusations in a follow-up Instagram post. He titled the post, "What We Don't Know and Know." And here's what he wrote. Number 1, we don't know for a fact that Cole was involved in the incident that he is alleged to have been a part of. Number 2, we don't know for a fact that Cole was behind the wheel or in his 2005 Ford Explorer when cameras caught that car leaving Lawrence, Kansas on US Highway 59. Number 3, we know for a fact that Cole would not go on the run in any situation. It is not in his character, despite what people think or say. It isn't worth it, and he would know that. Mo then went on to write, "It is important for everyone to refrain from making assumptions or speculating in any situation. Jumping to conclusions without verified information not only harms individuals' reputations, but also compromises the integrity of our ongoing investigations. Let us all commit to prioritizing facts and respecting due process, upholding the principles of fairness and justice for all involved." Mo then poses a question to his many social media followers. He wrote, "Would you not want this if Cole were your son, brother, nephew, cousin, family? Let us prioritize facts, respect due process, and uphold the principles of fairness and justice for all involved." All right, I'll keep watching the updates to the investigation, and I'll let you know of anything new when I know. And finally today, did you guys hear about the $30 million cash heist in LA County on Easter? This story is wild. A crew of highly sophisticated thieves shimmied through the roof of a Los Angeles storage facility, and without tripping any alarms or even causing noticeable damage to the outside of the safe that held the money, they made off with $30 million. I have a question. How heavy is $30 million? And how many thieves were there? Okay, here's what investigators are revealing. So there's this storage facility in Sylmar, California, where cash from various businesses across the valley is counted and stored. Okay, raise your hand if you knew that these kind of places existed, because I didn't. Well, on Easter Sunday night, investigators believe thieves attempted to cut a hole in the side of the storage facility. But when that was unsuccessful, they scaled the building and went through the roof of the storage facility that had a security system. But the thieves did not trip the alarms, and the police do not know how. Investigators are also baffled that the thieves even knew about the vault in the storage facility, saying very few individuals would have that knowledge. And Scott Selby, who co-authored a book about diamond heists and the intelligence behind them, told the LA Times that this theft had all the markings of a well-thought-out job that was done by a professional crew, and that based on his knowledge, the thieves likely had some insider intelligence about the facility. Now, police have also said that the money may be traceable and that the FBI has joined the investigation. Now, I'm just speculating, but what if the hole in the wall was made after they broke into the safe? In order for them to move the $30 million out of the facility? Investigators might have camera footage that shows the timeline differently, so my speculation could totally be wrong. But it's weird to me that criminals would be so sophisticated that they could crack a large safe without leaving any evidence of doing so, yet they tried to enter the building one way and then had to do an alternate route. Now, this crime feels like a Hollywood movie in the making. Well, that's your Monday episode of Rise in Crime. Thank you guys so much for the positive reviews. 5 stars and a review are always welcome. Please tell a friend about all of the Oh No Media podcasts. Just to remind you, that's Rise in Crime, Into the Dark, and Murder with My Husband. And I do know additional shows have been opened up for the Murder with My Husband tour. So if you're interested in those, you can go to ohnomedia.com and look for the various dates and places there. And thanks so much for putting a thumbs up on the video if you're watching via YouTube, or a like and follow on all of the other platforms. You can join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.